Okay, that's cool. Hi, everybody. I'm back again, and I'm here with another chapter of The Guardian of the Sword. Um, yeah, I also have a fly, so that is what it is. But if you see me swatting at something, it's pretty self explanatory. Anyway, so for those of you who are just tuning in, I am practicing and getting ready and getting kind of in the swing of doing regular readings again. I used to do them. I started up doing them during COVID, and now I kind of want to get back to doing them again because they are a lot of fun and they, well, they're fun. I really really like them. I know that my dad used to like. They're my dad's manuscripts, so wow. Okay, let's go. Let's rewind here. So for those of you who are just tuning in, I edit and publish my dad's novels. He wrote over 53 novels, short stories, poems, and articles before he died. And as his only child, I inherited the literary executorship. So I've been slowly publishing them. One of the ways to edit work is to hear the words out loud, and also so that I can practice talking to people and without uhs and ahs. Wait, uhs and ums and ahs. There we go. Anyway, so that doesn't happen, and yeah, so I can practice reading. What I did find was after I finished publishing Guardian of the Sword, I found an alternate manuscript. This one was from 1982, which was 5 years after the original manuscript, which was written in 1977, the final manuscript. There was more before that, but the final one ended up in 1977. And I published the 1977 version, then found this one, and now I want to do comparison. Plus, I'm practicing because to get back in the habit of reading manuscripts, and I'm going to be reading a lot of manuscripts because I have a lot of publishing to get done. So here we go. Without further ado, chapter 6. If you missed the other chapters, go back and you can watch past broadcasts. Meantime, chapter 6. The Hygerians were always learning afterward how to counter each new Asbelnian method, learning usually from disasters. They learned, but they were always a little behind. But learn they did, and in the later stages of the war, they learned with commendable swiftness. Indeed, had the war lasted yet another month, they might have reversed the tide, for they had always had the advantage of numbers. It was for this reason that Rorik urged a campaign of speed. Once the army was trained, trying always to keep the momentum of attack, always to move before the Hygerians were ready. The Hygerian War by Randall of Aventir. It was not too long after the destruction of the Hygerian force by Rorik and his horsemen that scouts brought word of a force of 600 Hygerians marching toward the hills. They foraged as they came, and farmers and villagers were able to gain a fair idea of their intentions by casual conversations, which the farmers and villagers dutifully passed on to the Asbelnian scouts. The circumstances presented a problem for Rorik and Connell. Rorik felt it was not yet safe to use the infantry, and Connell, a little reluctantly, had to support this judgment. As for meeting so large a force in a pitched battle with horsemen alone, that was also risky. But the fact that the Hygerian force included no cavalry gave the horsemen some advantage. They divided the horsemen into 3 groups, Connell leading 50, Rorik leading 50, and a young hillman named Randall, cousin to Helena, leading the remaining 50. They rode out to wear the Hygerians down with small raids, ambushes, which would cost the enemy a few here and a few there, but never allowing them to fight a proper battle until they were worn down and demoralized. About 400 Hygerians actually reached the hills, and by this time only 90 of the horsemen could ride to meet them. They had been willing to ride, but lacked the mounts on which to put them. There was therefore a good deal of discussion about the possibility of using their infantry in this battle. "It is my mind," declared Conall, "that we should throw in the infantry and utterly destroy this force of Hygerians. The infantry would turn the advantage of numbers to our side." Rorik nodded. "It would do that, but I believe that it may be too soon. What of our troops, Baran? Could we fight off twice our number of enemies?" After a moment's frowning consideration, Baran spoke, addressing Conall. "I wish, my Lord King, that I could say yes to that, but I must be honest. We have over 500 infantry, enough indeed to give us an advantage. But should one lone Hygerian escape to report a large force of infantry in the hills, we shall have 1,000 Hygerians marching on us, and several hundreds more forming garrisons in the lowlands. With the aid of the Icarians, we may keep them from the hills, but we would never be able to come down. And they need only keep us from the lowlands to render our horsemen useless, if only from lack of horsemen, or for lack of horses. But give us 1 week more, and I would gladly lead the infantry against up to half their number." "So," Conall said very softly, "I had feared as much. Are they doing well?" "Aye, my Lord King, very well for what they are. You see, we have young men here, all full of fire and fight, who have been ready to go and give battle since the night they first arrived. If we do not let them fight within 2 weeks, they will begin to lose that fire and desert. The same will happen if we lose our first battle, or indeed if we win the first 3. We require older men, steady men, who can hold the youngsters in check and give them an example to follow." "The older men have not come forth, then?" asked Conall in a mystified tone. "Ah, my Lord King, it is the temper of the Asbalian farmer. Remember that the innkeeper of Verdun doubted you until he saw the sword unsheathed. The word may be out from here to the southern sea that Conall is in the hills with the host, but your farmer will say, 'What may be, but I'll not leave my farm for traipsing and fighting across the land unless I know I'm surely who I fight for. And that means I must see the king face to face, with his army and all.'" He smiled briefly, then continued, "We must take Verdun, or something of that sort, within 2 weeks. Once we thus prove ourselves, the elder men will begin to come. And if not, we will be forced to make new plans. A failure here might not doom our cause, but it would force us to work at regaining people's trust. We might perhaps hire some of the barbarians from the wildlands." Conall's eyes flashed. "May I be slain for a mad dog if I bring the wolves over the threshold to drive out wolves already in the house. Should we perhaps trade the Hygerians for the Havartai in their war carts and their long swords and javelins, ruling our village with cruelty and terror?" Rorik smiled slightly. "We need not call in the wolves, Conall, but this coming battle must be carefully planned, and we must look to finding anyone in the lowlands who knows anything of construction and the garrison of the new fortress of Verdun." So, one morning, the whole of the mounted force rode out of Carroll Dawn, about 5 miles from the village, in an area dotted by clumps of brush. They prepared to meet the enemy. The men were sent out to remove any Hygerian scouts who might spot the ambush and warn the main body. As the troops moved to their positions, Rorik looked at Connell and said, "A sword, a bow, and a strong swift steed. And what more does a warrior need? A comrade riding at his side, forbear is the back that does brotherless ride." The prince grinned as he answered, "A good warhorse beneath the knee, a banner that blows above in the breeze. I, others have ridden alone and died. Forbear is the back that does brotherless ride." They clapped hands for an instant. Then Connell turned his horse and rode to his place across the field. Far from ahead, Rorik could hear the faint sounds of skirmishing between his scouts and the Hygerians. He looked down his line. The state of some horses concerned him, but they must mount as many as they possibly could for this battle. He could just see one of the 3 they had brought from the shifty-eyed Havartai with the horrible accent and the limp. As for armor, such as they had mostly of Hygerian manufacture, they had broken off and ground down the spikes from the shield bosses, and especially from the helmets. It was very easy enough in the dust and confusion of battle to mistake a friend or foe, without the difficulty of having friend dressed like foe. A knot of horses appeared at the far ridge. For a moment they milled there, and he could see the men loosing arrows at enemy as yet invisible to him. There was a movement in the line, and he saw that the man next to him had knocked an arrow. He cast another eye over the motley clothing and equipment. Helmets showing their braided hair decorated with brightly dyed feathers, fur kilts, and even numerous bare feet in the stirrups. He grinned, a trifle grimly. This tatterdemalion army was to challenge the might of the conquering Hygerians. And now the first of the Hygerians showed over the ridge, pursuing the fleeing horsemen. The horsemen did not flee very swiftly, it being their task to fix the attention of the enemy, so as to prevent their noticing the ambush. Now the Hygerians blackened the skyline, pouring down the slope. So the skirmishing horsemen pulled back farther and farther, sporadically turning loose arrows at the massive foemen. Suddenly, the horsemen were galloping for the brush, and Rorik could see the Hygerians as separate individuals, and could see, if he cared to, the expressions on the dark faces, mostly of grim concentration. The few bowmen among them drew arrows and loosed them in quick, precise movements, advancing a few paces at a time. The Hygerian host moved along with the archers. The formation, which had once been a column, now well on the way to being a disorderly crowd. A trumpet sounded, far across the field where Connell had stationed himself, and Hygerian bows lifted, bent, and launched their shafts. There was a shiver of motion along the line as they stooped forward to take another arrow from their saddle quivers. Hygerians began to fall, and arrows continued to fly. Even so, the Dark Ones began to form their battle line. Rorik, drawing his bow again and loosing, muttered to himself, "Now, Randall!" And then Randall came, galloping down at the Hygerian flank as they moved into position, his 20 men loosing arrows with all the skill they possessed. Randall's 20 had been chosen from those most proficient in mounted archery. The Hygerians began to attempt to face them. But Randall's group did not close, rather wheeled and rode back into the hilltop, where they turned again to shoot down on the Dark Ones. Rorik shouted, "Connell and Asballon!" and he urged his horse forward, about half the line moving with him, guiding their horses with their knees until they were close, then loosing their arrows. Then Rourke and his force dropped their bows to hang on their saddle pommels, and swords hissed from their scabbards. They clove into the Hygerians, some of whom had already begun to flee. From this time, Rourke lost all sight of what happened elsewhere, for there was a time of desperate hand-to-hand fighting. The ancient cry of the Icarians was in the air. Creiaeric! The earth endures! Somewhere in the back of his mind, full thoughts of his lost castle of Aventure, his uncle Ross falling in the rack, he did know what ought to be happening, while the Hygerians sought to hold firm in the face of Rourke's charge. Connell would continue to shoot into the other flank. At the same time, Randall would lead his own little force down, forcing the Hygerians to have a care for their rear as well. Then, when he judged them sufficiently disordered, Connell would charge in with his own force. Dust arose, and among the struggling men, iron rang on iron. War cries sounded. It seemed to Rourke that it was hours that the sword had been rising and falling in his hand. And where were Connell and Randall? Suddenly he was in the open, and the only Hygerians before him were fleeing for the brush. The horsemen pursued, attacking whenever groups of them formed, out of pride, desperation, or both, to fight. Then Rourke looked around him and saw there were only 5 men with him, and reined in his horse. He called to the others, "We are too scattered. Go, find whoever you can of our men, and send them to rally. The battle is won, and we must not lose badly needed men and horses fighting foes made strong by desperation." The battle brought them a good deal of booty, much of it equipment which was used for their own force. Much else went to the limping, shifty-eyed Havertai trader and some of his colleagues, for the horse situation was now near critical. Continued horse expeditions went into the lowlands, but had to go farther and farther from the safety of the hills. Okay, so that is chapter 6. Yeah, a little more military heavy, but sometimes they get to be like that. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think a blending of the two manuscripts is in order. That's at a later date, though, much later date. But anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in, and yeah, I guess if anybody had any questions, I would entertain them right now. Like I said, what I plan to do is when I'm taking a sip of coffee, I'm going to try and do better to look at the chats to see if anything's happening. They may not. That's fine too. I'm mostly here to try and practice reading, and also to hear what sounds okay, what might need some work. So this is all part and parcel. All of it works. Yeah. So, and if nothing else, somebody else gets to hear some stories as they're in the making. And yeah, maybe I will also later on, much later on, I will do some readings of the books once they're already published, and the first versions of the books anyway, and then the published books, just to kind of give an idea of how things may have changed a little bit since they were first being read as manuscripts, to see what kind of editorial changes I did. Yeah, so again, once more, I will say thank you for tuning in. I will be back again tomorrow night. It'll be a late night because it's a Friday night, so I'm going to be coming in a little bit later. But I will do another reading then, and I will talk to you all then soon. So have a good night.